Leif Dahleen, better known as the physician on fire, retired from medicine at age 43, having achieved financial independence several years earlier. He started Physician on Fire to enlighten, educate, and entertain other high income professionals while discussing money matters of all sorts. He's happily married with 2 children. They call Northern Michigan their home base and, until quite recently, spent much of the year traveling as a family. Welcome, Leif.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be here talking with you.
So much of what I see in the financial independence world seems formulated for some scrappy youngsters who want to hit financial independence early, usually before they take on debt, before they've built a career, or even ever get a high salary. But it seems like you're aiming at a very different market. Doctors who spend over a decade building a career, often to have a ton of debt and bring in very high salaries. So before we jump into the specific topic about retirement accounts, I'm wondering, like, how does that picture differ for them, and how does that kind of color some of the teachings that you put out there?
Yeah, you're spot on. I didn't know what financial independence was until I was older than a lot of these youngsters that you're talking about had already figured out that they could retire. So I stumbled upon financial independence as a concept when I was about 39 years old, and I had been saving and working, investing, and realized that
Wait a second. Wait.
yeah,
39. You said that you retired at 43 and you'd already been financially independent for years. So are you saying by the time you stumbled on it, you were basically there already?
yeah, I did the math. I was like, okay, 25x, we have this, we spend this. Yeah. I was like, honey, I don't have to go to work tomorrow. I mean, I will, but according to everything I'm reading, it's optional now. And at that point, we came up with about a 5-year plan. So, ended up being about 4 years. And so what's different for people who, follow on my path and become physicians and spend, 12 years in post high school education? Well, you have a huge, huge sunk cost in terms of time and money. And it takes some time to recoup that. Of course, you do make a good salary, but you don't do it until typically you're in your 30s. And so we're definitely delayed in some ways, but we have you might call it a big shovel to use to dig out of the hole that is the student loan debt and many self-induced debts like big homes and big vacations and everything big. Yeah.
So it seems like one other big difference is in this area of retirement funds, which is why I wanted to speak to you specifically about that. Because, if you're somebody who's, 19 going for financial independence, who's trying to do it through house hacking or other strategies, you're probably making very little. You're probably, you're trying to keep your costs super low. But if you're somebody who's making a really significant salary, say, $250,000 or more, with an aim to be in the future making very little, to be financially independent and retired, then really taking advantage of all of these tax deferred retirement accounts seems to be a much more important strategy than it is for those scrappy youngsters.
Yes, and you may have more options available, but I suppose we should just start at the top and
Okay,
kind of
great.
work our way into the more esoteric things that you might find. But for example, at the income range that you and I are talking about, you're not going to be able to just directly put money into a traditional IRA. Right? The government has rules that if you make more than 70 or 120,000 or something like that, depending on if you're single or married, you can't just go ahead and put that 6,000 into an IRA. You can't also make a direct Roth contribution. You can't say, I'm going to put 6,000 in a Roth IRA, because once again, you're going to make too much money if you're making a physician's salary. But there are ways to work around that. There is a trick called the backdoor Roth IRA, in which you make a contribution. It's a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, and then promptly do a conversion to a Roth IRA. And the result is basically identical to making a Roth IRA contribution of $6,000, which is the limit. You just have to do it in 2 steps. And
Gotcha. So for anyone who's not familiar, let's start with the real basics.
yeah,
What is a Roth IRA and why is it important to do so? What is so good about a Roth IRA?
that's a good question. So an IRA in general, that's an individual retirement arrangement. You can also use the word account, but the IRS says arrangement, so that's the one I go with, is money that you set aside, and there are tax advantages to have money in that retirement arrangement or account. And the government will not tax the money as it grows, as it becomes more valuable over time. And if it's a traditional IRA, you will pay income taxes when you withdraw the money years down the road. But the benefit in the traditional, i.e. tax deferred IRA, is that you have a tax deduction for the amount of money you put into it. So if you put $6,000 into a traditional IRA, you don't pay taxes on that $6,000 when you put it in. The other flavor, if you will, of IRA is the Roth IRA. And a Roth, you do not get that upfront tax deduction. So you're taking after-tax money. Again, $6,000 is the limit per year. If you are 50 years older or above, it's $7,000. You invest that money in the Roth IRA, it grows tax-free, and it can be withdrawn tax-free later on. So that's the advantage of the Roth. Tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals.
So the backdoor Roth IRA, it basically allows that anybody can have the power of the Roth IRA, even if you don't qualify with the government's technical ceiling
income guidelines of, once you're over, it's about 190,000 as a couple married filing jointly now, then you are not allowed to make direct Roth contributions, but the end result is the same. I will add one caveat, and I know this is getting pretty technical, but if you have any traditional IRA money in your name, say when you were younger, you started a traditional IRA, or you have a SEP IRA through a business that you have, or a simple IRA, which is a retirement plan that some small employers offer, there is an issue where you might be taxed if you try to do the backdoor Roth. So ideally, you either don't have any tax-deferred traditional IRA money in your name, or you take that and you either pay the taxes to convert it to Roth money, or you can roll it over into, say, an employer's 401k if your employer allows it. So I think that's worth mentioning because someone might think they're going to do this backdoor Roth and not pay taxes, and then lo and behold, there are some extra taxes they didn't expect.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the 401k. I have to admit, I personally have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the 401k. I'm not excited by it as a whole, but when you've got employer matches, it's like free money. So could you tell us a bit about the 401k and when you recommend it and when you don't recommend it?
Absolutely. So like you said, many 401ks, and we can lump in a 403b that's almost identical and offered by some nonprofit employers. If the employer offers a match, that is totally free money. That's like an instant return. So they might set it up so that, the first $6,000 you put in, they will also contribute $6,000. So for the $6,000 out of your paycheck that you contribute to that 401k, you magically have $12,000. You absolutely, positively want to do that before anything else in your whole investment realm. And in 2020, you can put up to $19,500 into that 401k or 403b. And again, it's going to act a lot like an IRA. It's going to grow tax-free. And if you put the money in a tax-deferred, tax-deductible way so that you get a tax deduction on the amount of money you put into it, then you will pay taxes eventually when you withdraw it. However, you may also have the option, and this depends on your employer's plan, but it's pretty common now, you may have the option to do Roth 401k contributions. And I think that makes sense in the lower tax brackets. And again, that's going to work just like the Roth IRA, where the money not only grows tax-free, but can be withdrawn tax-free, with the caveat that you will pay taxes on the money that you contribute to the Roth 401k or 403b.
So it sounds like if you're in a low income bracket now and you can pay a small amount of taxes and then take that after-tax money and put it into a Roth, that might be smart if you're somebody who's hoping to be growing into higher income brackets later. But if you're somebody in a super high income bracket now and you're paying high taxes, and like yourself, maybe planning on leaving that high income job at some point in the future and then being in a low income bracket later, it probably makes more sense to do the 401k. So you're not paying any taxes when you're in the high income bracket. And then when you take it out, you get taxed at whatever bracket you're in at that
Right.
time.
Yeah. There's a little bit of guesswork in there, right? Because we don't know what the tax code is going to be in the future, how it's going to change. We don't know when we might retire. But when you think about the fact that later on, when you are actually withdrawing the money that you put into the 401k, you're going to fill up those low brackets in the tax code first. I think for me that the cutoff is probably somewhere, there's a pretty big jump right now. Now this may change in the future, but the tax brackets go from 24% to 32%. The next dollar you make is going to be taxed 8% higher. And so I think at the 24% and lower tax brackets, traditional makes Roth contributions make good sense. 32% and above, I would take that tax deduction now. And there are a number of other factors that could go into that decision-making process. But yeah, I like the Roth for the lower tax brackets, traditional tax deferred for higher.
Now, if you're somebody who's making a lot of money and you've got a ton of money in your 401k, and then you leave that job, maybe take a couple years off, and suddenly your income plummets, there's something called the Roth conversion ladder that allows you to move that 401k money to Roth money, right? Could you explain exactly how that works?
Sure. So one other unique aspect of Roth IRA money is that you can withdraw any contributions that you made. Let's say you put in $6,000 a year for a bunch of years. Mm-hmm. You can take out the $6,000 that you put in each year at any point. You can't take out the earnings without paying penalty, but you can take out the contribution. That also is true of Roth conversions. So that's where the Roth conversion ladder comes into play. And you mentioned that you can have this ladder. So the way it works, and like you said, it works well if you are now in a lower tax bracket and you don't have other income to fill up those low brackets. So you can take money in your traditional 401k, traditional IRA, make a Roth conversion. You'll pay some taxes when you turn that tax deferred money into Roth money. But once that money has been seasoned or sitting for 5 years, then you can also withdraw those conversions. And so you're basically just setting yourself up. The conversion you did 5 years ago, and then you do on the next year, the next year, the next year. 5 years after that initial conversion, you now have that money accessible to you without penalty at any age. It's a good trick if you don't have money set aside elsewhere, like in a taxable brokerage account, which is one of my favorite investment accounts. Because I don't love the idea of withdrawing Roth IRA money, because once you take it out, you can't put it back in, right? And that's money that could be growing tax-free indefinitely and forever. Of course, you don't want to take every dollar to your grave either. So for the people that, like you said, maybe have a large tax-deferred balance, not much money elsewhere, that's a great way to get to that money long before age 59 and a half. You don't have to think about paying any penalties when you do so.
But it seems like even if you don't want to be taking the money, it's a cool way to be getting money out of your Roth if you want it. But it's also a great way if you're expecting to be making more money in the future. Like say you just took like a 2-year sabbatical or something, and you're expecting your salary to go back up in the future. Yep. It's a good way to get money out of your 401k at a time when you have low income, when you're not going to be taxed a lot, put it in the Roth, and then never have to pay taxes on it again.
Yeah, just fill up those low brackets. Don't let them go to waste, right? Yeah, if you don't have any income coming in different ways, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, awesome. Tell me a bit about the 457B.
Yes, so many higher income professionals have this other account called a 457B. It works in some ways like a 401k, and a lot of times you'll have both the Roth and the tax-deferred traditional options with those. And they come in two main varieties that should really have different names, but they're both called 457B. There is a governmental 457B, which is wonderful. It acts very much like a 401k, and it is not subject to the creditworthiness of your employer. Basically, it is as good as the U.S. government in terms of how safe that money is. Now, the other option is the non-governmental 457B, And that money really isn't your money until you withdraw it. It is technically deferred compensation that your employer has. So you want to be a little more careful when you think about investing in a non-governmental 457B. However, there are some pretty cool advantages to both of them. And the main one is that once you leave your employer, when you're no longer with them, you can take that money out and not pay any penalty regardless of age. So again, that's a great option for people looking to retire before age 59 and a half. And also, if you have the governmental variety, that's one that you can roll over into a number of other accounts, like a rollover IRA, whereas the non-governmental 457B, basically all you do is you can take it out in cash and then do what you like with it. Another thing you want to look out for is you want to know your withdrawal options, because some of them require a lump sum distribution. And if you work for the same employer for 15, 20, 25 years, that might be a 7-figure lump sum that you take out. And you can imagine what the tax bill is going to look like on that if it was all tax deferred money. Now, most plans, any decent plan, will have a variety of options that you can set up when you leave your employer. Like, for example, the job I left, I had a 457B, and it actually had money from a prior non-governmental 457B that I rolled into it. So it's at least a couple $100,000. And they will allow me to say, I want $3,000 a month for X number of years until the money runs out. Or I could have it paid out quarterly, semi-annually, annually, at any amount that I choose. So it was very flexible in that way, which is nice. But you want to know what those options are, because you don't want to be stuck with a, lump sum, 7-figure, boom, there it is. I mean, it's not the worst thing that could happen, right? It falls in your lap, but you're going to give up darn near half of it probably to taxes if it all comes at once.
Let's talk about the HSA as well.
Health savings account. Yes.
Yeah.
And again, you need to make sure you're dealing with an HSA as opposed to an FSA, which is a flexible savings account that has to be used up by the end of the year, maybe with a little money rolling over. But an HSA, health savings account, does not have any requirement to be depleted. A lot of people use it as another retirement account. You can put it's about, I think, $3,550 for single filers in per year, that many dollars, and $7,100 if you are a family. And it has to be paired with a high deductible health insurance plan. So not everyone gets access to an HSA. But if you do have a qualifying plan, and there are many, they're fairly common, you can use that HSA. The benefit is like no other retirement or other account. It's triple tax-free. It acts like a tax-deferred IRA or 401k with the money going in. You get a tax deduction every time. The money will grow tax-free like it does in those other tax-advantaged accounts. And if you take it out and use it for healthcare expenses, when you withdraw it, it's tax-free on the way out. So it's kind of like you get the best of both the traditional and the Roth. You get tax-free withdrawals, you get tax-deductible contributions, and that money can grow tax-free for a number of years. And so a lot of people will use this as not so much as an account to pay medical expenses as they go, but as a vehicle for investment growth. And if you save your receipts from medical expenses that you do incur over the years, and you can scan them, and maybe your HSA account has a way for you to upload them right into their cloud, and they made it easier in recent years. But you could, for example, put in your $7,000 a year for 20 years with investment growth. You might have $250,000. And then let's say over the last 20, 25 years, we've had $100,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. You can reimburse yourself all at once at the end. Now, I don't necessarily trust myself to keep track of everything just right. I don't know if maybe I have a head injury or I'm gone and my wife doesn't know all the rules. I actually take the money out as I go, but it's rare. In fact, I don't think it's ever happened that we've met our deductible. I don't think we've ever spent $7,000 or whatever the HSA max contribution was per year. So every year that account has had money added to it, by the end of the year, even if we do have, we've got a couple of kids. They've had surgeries. We've had the, a few $1,000s here, a few $1,000s there for a hernia, ear tubes, tonsils, whatever. But so we're using it as an investment account. And it's quite likely that you will have medical expenses that you can use that money for eventually. Like you can pay some of your Medicare supplement premiums and that sort of thing out of it. But if you do end up with more money than you can use on medical expenses, you have the option after age 65 of withdrawing that money and then just paying taxes on it at whatever your income tax rate is then. And if that's what you end up doing with it, then it acted no different than a tax-deferred IRA, tax-deferred traditional 401k. And that's kind of a worst case scenario. But most of that money, and probably all, will eventually be used to cover medical expenses, is my guess.
Yeah, and as people age, their medical expenses tend to go up anyway. So it's having a lot of money designated for medical expenses doesn't seem like such a bad negative there.
But you can't use it to pay for insurance premiums along the way. So just keep that in mind too. Like I said, some like Medicare supplements and that sort of thing, it does pay for, you can use it for. But me now being, semi-retired early and paying my own health insurance, I can't use the HSA to pay the monthly premiums of my health insurance. Just the out-of-pocket expenses.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing that really stings for us people into financial independence about these retirement funds is this 59 and a half age that you have to hit in order to access this money. Like the whole retirement funds idea seems based on the model of somebody working an entire career, that it is just your default. I'm going to work maybe not till I die, but at least into my 60s.
Yeah.
So,
or be employed. You can do work without actually being, employed by someone and or even having an income, right? I mean, I'm sure you do lots of good work that doesn't necessarily equate directly to earning money, right?
Oh yeah, most of my work doesn't equate to earning money.
Right.
Most of my energy is spent writing my books, and those are a tiny percentage of our income at this point, pretty negligible. So, what if we want access to that money early? We talked about some ways of doing so, but if you're somebody who sees yourself being able to be financially independent, if you take all of your money and put it into good passive income generating sources, and rather sitting in a 401k or a Roth IRA, and the money's sitting there for when you're in your 60s, but doesn't really help you live now. Right. What can we do to play the game smart?
Yeah, lots of different options. One is just investing outside of retirement accounts. I still like the idea of maxing out every tax advantage account you have. But if you earn enough that you can do that and you spend little enough that you have leftover money, then I do like a taxable brokerage account, or it could be real estate or anything that you invest in outside of those retirement accounts. And then obviously there are no age restrictions there. We did talk about the Roth conversion ladder, the ability to remove any Roth contributions that you've made in the past. And even the 401k, if you don't retire super early, but work until you're 54 and retire and leave your employer in the year in which you will turn 55, you actually can start withdrawing that money then. It's kind of a weird little thing that most people don't know about, but you don't have to be 59 and a half to get 401k money. It's the year in which you turn 55 that it is available to you. So anytime from 54 on, when you leave, you can get the 401k money. And the 457B is another. There are no age restrictions on withdrawing from those. And there is another trick. It's called taking substantially equal periodic payments, SEPP, based on Rule 72T from your IRA. And that can be a rollover IRA that came from a 401k. So this is another way to get to any traditional IRA or 401k money that you have. And you have to set this up. And there are some actuarial calculations that need to be made, but you can do this at any age. And it'll look a lot like my 457B money, where you say, okay, I'm going to get X number of dollars per year, and that will continue until I turn 59 and a half. So you set it up once, and it's, again, penalty free. So you might get a check for $2,100 every month from age whatever it is that you set it up until you're 59 and a half, and then you can change things up. So lots of different ways to do it. I know some people forego contributing to tax advantage accounts simply because they don't want that money to be quote unquote locked up, but it's not locked up, right? There are all these different things that you can do, and many of which other early retirees are doing. Now, for me, it's mostly the taxable brokerage account. That's where more than half of our investments ended up being.
Okay, great. And one other thing, transitioning a bit from retirement accounts, but you talked about charitable donor advised funds, and I wanted to hear a bit about that. I know that's a real passion of yours about how we can intelligently be giving to charities, and wonder if you could comment a bit about that.
Sure. I think it's a natural segue, right? We're talking about tax advantaged investing, and this is really tax advantaged giving. And I see that not so much as a way for me to save on taxes, right? It's not a selfish thing. It means I can give more money to the charity for the same amount of dollars that come out of my pocket if it's done in a tax advantaged way. So, if I just take $1 out of my pocket and put it in the basket at church, the church gets $1 and I've departed with $1, right? But if I do it in a tax advantaged way, and let's say my marginal income tax bracket is 40%-ish between state, local, national, then I can give $1.80 to the church and it only costs me $1, right? So now I'm parting with the same amount of money, and the charity, the church, whoever I'm giving to, gets quite a bit more. So I wanted to cover that first, because some people don't like, oh yeah, it's just this greedy thing he does. No, oh my gosh, no, not at all. A donor advised fund is basically another account that you can donate money to, and it will be in your name, but it is not your money. You have control, and you decide which bona fide charities receive it and when they get it. And you do that whenever you want, when you just make a grant, and they make it really simple. But essentially, I looked at it as another account that I wanted to be built up before I retired. So I had a nest egg goal, and then I had a donor advised fund goal that was 10% the size of that nest egg goal. Mm-hmm. And I knew if I had done that, which we did before retiring, I would have enough money to donate at least $10,000 to charities indefinitely based on the 4% rule. So our goal was like $250,000 in donor advised funds. And now we have this account. It's got that money and more. We continue to give from it each year. And I'm using my website, the physicianonfire.com site that I started, and donating half the profits, a lot of them to the donor advised fund, but also to other charities from it. And it works out just really, really well. It's a great way to set yourself up with a lifetime giving account. You can do it in a tax advantage way because you get a tax deduction when you fund that donor advised fund, when you put the money into it, not on the way out. But you can give grants from it, for decades down the line, even though you're taking that tax deduction right now.
It almost sounds like a mini foundation for people without millions of dollars.
Right. Yep. And you can start one with as little as, I believe it's $5,000 with Fidelity Charitable, and you can give grants of $50 at a time. And the fees are pretty darn low. They're very similar to the tax drag I would have on that money if it was sitting in a taxable brokerage account. So yeah, I'm a big fan, and I've encouraged quite a few of my readers to start donor advised funds of their own. And it is a lot like a little foundation. It just has fewer reporting requirements and other requirements. It's just really easy to do. And it also saves you a ton of time in bookkeeping in terms of the grants you make, because let's say you make one big donation to your donor advised fund. Let's say it's $100,000. That's one thing to report to the IRS, right? That you report it once, you get the deduction, done. And then you can give that money out $50,000, $500,000, $1,000 at a time, hundreds of grants, and you don't have to keep track of any of it, right? You don't have to, here's $50. You don't have to worry about all that itemizing those little donations you might make here, there, and everywhere.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned your readers and the advice you give them. If somebody does want to read your things or connect with you elsewhere, how can they best find you?
Just type in POFIRE.com, POFire.com. That will take you to Physician on Fire. And I'm on all the socials, or at least most of them: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just at Physician on Fire. Pretty easy to find.
Okay, fantastic. Leif, thank you so much for all this insight. It's definitely got me thinking about my retirement funds and what I want to be doing with them.
Very
Thank
good,
you so much
Dave.
for coming on.
Yeah, it was a great talk.